pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, Jonathan Adashek, Senior Vice President, Marketing Communications at IBM. And we're going to talk about, guess what? AI in marketing. Now, Jonathan has an impressive, I'd actually call it an extraordinary career path that makes him particularly well qualified to understand and embrace AI under all its facets. Now, believe it or not, he started his career in politics. He's probably the only global CMO who's actually worked in the White House, back then under the Clinton administration. He then spent time in the US administration. He ran multiple US presidential campaigns before joining Edelman and then later Nissan. And today, Jonathan is in charge of IBM's global marketing, communications, and corporate citizenship. He's one of the most tech-savvy CMOs out there, working for a company that has long believed in the potential of artificial intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Adashek. Thank
you.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Jonathan. We're going to talk about probably the single most debated issue in our industry right now, Gen AI in marketing. But before we do that, we'd like to turn to you guys, take the pulse of the audience, okay? And we'd love to hear from you how you see the impact of generative AI on your marketing in the next 12 months, okay? And again, please be candid. It's absolutely anonymous. And so the options: no impact, not a priority; limited impact, only just getting started; moderate impact, we're managing expectations; really significant impact, big change; huge impact, one of the biggest transformation shifts. So this is over the next 12 months, okay, just to be clear. And interesting to see that the majority of the audience, Jonathan, are brand owners, so we'll see the client's view when it comes to the possible impact of Gen AI in marketing over the next 12 months. Give ourselves 10 more seconds so that you can all get a chance to vote. Okay. Here we go. A moderate impact, 33%. A really significant impact, 28%. A huge impact, 19%. And 2% no impact. Okay, so we've got 98% who are forecasting a big impact. Jonathan, how do you react to those results? Any surprise?
I actually think huge impact is the answer really is going to be. And I'm sort of surprised that that number is not a little bit bigger, because I think the applications in our space and what it really can do for us is just, there's so much potential.
We'll get into that into our conversation. There's a first question I'd like for you, Jonathan, which is a bit more personal. It's not about Gen AI, but I was absolutely fascinated to see your career path, and you landed, I think, your first job in the White House. Tell me how you landed your first job in the White House.
Well, first, let me just say thank you for having me. And you said I was one of the most tech-savvy marketers there today, and I was looking over my shoulder backstage to figure out who you were talking about, because it's not me. It's my team. I ended up at the White House because I got the bug when I was young. My mom ran for school board in our local village. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I remember hammering in lawn signs in the frozen snow in February and going, I want to get involved in politics in a bigger deal. And I was maybe 9 years old. And I said, I want to go work in the West Wing of the White House. And I want to slog through the snows of Iowa or New Hampshire with a presidential candidate. And I made those a focus for me. And I did what it took to get to those. And I was lucky. I got some great opportunities. And I got to do both of those things. It's an amazing experience.
Super. Okay, let's now move to the subject of the day, the menu du jour, which is Gen AI in marketing. And my first question is how do you look at Gen AI in marketing from an IBM perspective? And before you respond to that question, I'd like us to just run the video, please, now.
Introducing IBM Creative Assistant, an AI tool built with watsonx that accelerates the creation of brand-compliant blogs, emails, social posts, and other marketing assets. Let's take a look at our internal beta version to see how it works. Here you see a list of IBM products. Creative Assistant has been trained on each, and can answer questions and generate content by referencing the vetted claims, key value propositions, and other pertinent information it's ingested. Pose a question to Product Assistant, the AI assistant within the tool, and it quickly generates a concise answer and provides reference links for further discovery. With the email generator, you can draft multi-topic emails in just a few clicks. Simply select a template, add reference links to blog posts, for example, and indicate how many options you'd like. Click Generate, and Creative Assistant produces copy for each section of the email and pulls images from a predefined library. Once you've made your selections, you can preview the email and download it for revision or review. To use the blog generator, input a topic or multiple topics and add images. Creative Assistant quickly produces a detail-rich blog post. You can regenerate or download and revise. The social media generator works in much the same way. The templates guide you toward content tailor-made for specific social platforms. Just follow the prompts, and Creative Assistant does the heavy lifting. Feel free to tinker with the AI-generated copy. Voila, you've got a great post. Creative Assistant also helps generate large quantities of engaging DCO banners. Input source material for each phase of the marketing journey, and Creative Assistant delivers a range of options. Creative Assistant empowers our strategists, copywriters, designers, and product marketers to bolster their productivity and devote more time to high-priority projects. Just imagine what an AI tool trained on your products and your brand standards can do for you.
That's not a commercial that we've put out there for people. Literally, we're using that to help train everybody across our organization who can start using that.
Excellent. And what's your take on how smart brand owners are using communications and marketing? How are using AI in communications and marketing? And before you respond to that question, I just want to say to the audience, you can actually participate in the Q&A. You go on Slido, #GMW2024. We'll see the questions here on Slido, and we'll weave them into the conversation. Yeah. So my question to you, Jonathan, is how are smart brand owners using AI for communication and marketing?
Well, there are a lot of smarter brand owners in this audience than me, who I'm sure are doing it a lot better. And to be included in a group with people like Raja and Allison and Stefan and others who I look up to and I learn from them all the time. I'd encourage everybody to talk to them too. But for us, we're looking beyond just the content creation. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about AI in our field today, are talking about how can I use it to create new content. And we've used it in creating content. We used Firefly to create an ad for the Masters last year when it was just out in beta, and it was a digital ad, and that ad had 27 times our average engagement. It was our highest performing digital ad of the year. And it changed the way that we were able to look and create content. And I remember showing it to my boss, to the CEO, as we were getting ready to go to Augusta, and he looked at it and he said, this is great, but it's also disappointing because I thought with Firefly I'd be able to get rid of the agency altogether, but I see that we can't. We've got to keep the agency, and they're going to be even more valuable to us.
Careful, we've got agencies here.
I'm looking at Stefan right out in front here, who's a great partner of ours. But for me, this is also using AI to look beyond that, beyond the creation. I'm looking every morning at dashboards that show me how much money we spent and how much time we spent to create a piece of content, how much money we're putting behind it, how that's performing, down to the click. And I can now start doing live-time A/B testing to really get a much better flow of what the audience and what our clients are looking for. I can also use it to move resources that I haven't been able to do in the past. I mean, there's just so many applications. For me, it is really pulling all the pieces together and weaving all that data. We're doing as IBM, we'll do roughly 2,000 events this year. And that's from very big events to very 10-person dinners, smaller events. How do those all perform, and where do we need to lifetime move money and refocus so we stay aligned to the business? AI is going to make a massive, massive shift for us.
We had a CMO forum yesterday, so basically a group of CMOs, 40, 50 CMOs, meeting behind closed doors, Chatham House rules, talking very candidly about how GenAI was going to be significantly transforming the way we look at marketing. And there was one CMO who had this sort of interesting analogy. So they were saying, look at the automotive industry, the cars in the 40s and 50s and the cars now. And the invention of the wind tunnel and the impact it's had on automotive. And so the question was, what happens when the technology gets available to everyone, including to my competitors? How do I stand out as a brand? What makes me unique? Is there not a risk of commoditization? Everyone basically uses that technology in order to be more effective, more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, as a company, we're looking at it a little differently than I think many others are. I like to equate AI to an iceberg. There's 20% above the water, and it's this bright, shiny object that people are really focused on. And it's the consumer stuff. It's the chat GPTs, which is very good for its specific application. What we're looking at IBM is the 80% below the water. And we really believe that that's where big, significant changes are going to happen. And that work below the water is how companies are going to differentiate from what's going on. So we take an approach of, we create AI to answer questions or take advantage of opportunities for companies in the way that they would want them to be addressed. You go to a certain pharmacy because you want the care that that pharmacy gives you, or you go to a certain hospital for that, or you go to a bank because of the way they treat you and the benefits you get. You don't want to go to that bank and get the view of a different bank. So when we create models for whether it's marketing or other use cases in businesses today, we're creating it with that company's data, tailored and tuned to the way that they would be dealing with the situation, which allows them to have more trust, and it allows them to actually stand firmer to their values and their beliefs. Because you talk about cars, or pick whatever it is, people come to IBM because of the work we do, and they trust us, and we've got standards or a reputation and principles of what makes us IBM versus what makes Microsoft. I think AI is going to actually allow companies to double down on those policies, on those standards, and have even more engagement with clients that they weren't able to have in the past.
Picking a question here on Slido, how does hiring marketers change with AI? What skills will you now look for?
Well, it's interesting. That's an interesting question, because I am trying to hire a CMO right now. So if anybody knows a good enterprise CMO, send me a note. This might not be the right room for that. I did say that, though.
I did tell Jonathan that there are approximately 30 to 40 CMOs in this room, so okay.
But what are we looking for? I think there's two pieces of it. One is people have to be enabled from the top to the bottom of the organization. They have to be enabled to use the right tools. But then they also have to be able to work in an organization that has those tools. Because I might have people using one AI tool in my organization, but half the organization isn't using that. But it is changing the way different pieces of the organization are doing business. And people have to understand how they apply it, where they apply it, and then how do they better prioritize what they're doing. I think that's going to be key. A key thing that I look for when I'm hiring is very simply propensity to learn. Is somebody going to be willing to roll up their sleeves and learn and get better?
A question here that we discussed actually in the run-up to the conference. How is AI in B2B marketing different to AI in B2C marketing?
I think a big difference that we've got today, especially in tech, is the buying group for B2B is very different than trying to get a consumer to buy a bottle of soda. We're looking today in tech at IBM, we're looking at 17 to 19 people in a buying group. And those buying groups change with every different purchase. You might have 2 or 3 that stay core, but then you'll have a different set of people that are involved in each buying group. And the buying groups also, a buying process can take 31 to 38 weeks. And people don't stay engaged full time in that whole case. So you're really trying to follow when people are coming in and when people are pulling out of the process, and you're trying to track along. We've actually found from a B2B perspective, we did some research with BCG, and we found that if we touch 4 individuals at a VP plus level in an organization that's looking at a transaction with us, if we have 4 engagements with them within a 60-day window, the likelihood of them doing a transaction and the size of the transaction exponentially increases. So it's a very, I think it's a slightly different model. And it's also, I think the other thing that it is, I became a marketer 2.5 years ago when my boss said to me, hey, if I put you in charge of marketing, what would you do? Please go home and think about that. And the next morning I came in and he said, you're in charge of marketing, what are you gonna do? And that night I was like, how the hell do I create demand? I have no idea how to do this, create the pipeline. But what we're thinking, the funnel, people love to talk about top of funnel and bottom funnel. For us, it is a zigzag. There is no straight down, and people might zigzag down and then pop back up, and as it changes with the people.
There's a question here around managing cultural change of integrating Gen AI in the organization. Just keeping in mind, what does it mean from a marketing team perspective, and how do you manage that cultural change?
I think there's a real part of the cultural change is transparency. We're all trying something new, and it's not always going to work. And I always say that to the team, like, this is not going to be perfect, and we're going to figure out what we're going to do, whether it's with Gen AI or something else, a new plan we lay out. We're going to adjust along the way. And I think a big part of that is celebrating the wins, but equally as important is celebrating the failures and letting people learn from the failures in a good way, in a productive way, and then adjust and move forward. So I think that is really, really key to making it work.
I've got a question here from the public. I'm not sure if it hasn't been prepared. I'm not sure if you can respond, but what role do you think would AI play in helping address complex issues such as the climate crisis?
I think AI has a role to play there because as you can get more predictive and you're looking at data. So as a company, we're working with the UAE in Abu Dhabi, for example, right now. And we're looking at heat islands in Abu Dhabi by taking all sorts of data, different sources of data, and putting those together, which then allow them to identify where would a heat island be, what can they do to fix it, do they expect something coming? So there's, excuse me, there's many different applications for it. I think it's being realistic about when we're gonna be ready for various pieces of AI. And then I think the next thing that's coming is quantum computing. And when quantum and AI get put together, I think the power becomes even bigger to solve some of those even more complex issues.
Interesting. We ran a survey in a round to the conference among our members about Gen AI, third parties playing a role in implementing Gen AI with brand owners. In 50% of the cases, brands were actually working with third parties. But it was actually quite shocking to see that only 3% of those brand owners understood how those third parties were actually using Gen AI on their behalf. So to a large extent, brand owners still today are very much in the dark. Only 8% have policies actually in place for those third parties. What's your take on this? What would be your advice?
I think that the key for us on how it's being used, it goes back to that point that I was just talking about on transparency. You need to, it's almost like a nutrition label that needs to be put onto AI. So people understand where it's coming from, when it's being used, what was what was the data used to create it. And you can't sort of duck behind it and say, oh, this isn't really AI. But you can't also say, oh, this is AI if it's not. And I think what's really gonna be important here is regulation. And regulation is gonna impact all of us in all aspects of how we're using AI. And firmly, I believe that we should be regulating the use case on the AI. And it's really different to have an AI tell you that you should go and turn right here when you're driving someplace and that road is closed, but you end up 5 minutes late, versus giving a medical view or a loan decision, a credit decision. Those are very different places. So regulation of that use case is really going to be essential.
The question here from marketers, and we've heard a lot of those questions actually since the beginning of the week, is how do you make sure that Gen AI in marketing is more than just a cost-cutting tool? So in order to be adding value to what marketers do today?
I don't see it, I'll be honest, I don't see it as a cost-cutting tool. I'm very lucky, and I work for a CEO who doesn't say, I want money back. No, every once in a while he does, but but it's not, I talk to a lot of my colleagues who are like, yeah, my budget's being cut. Yes, my budget this past year went down. But it went down, but we're still delivering the same number, actually an increased number of CIs. We've lowered the costs of CIs by, I believe it's about 30% year over year. So it's almost actually like we're putting another $100 million worth of spend into the system by doing this. So for me, it's not a cost cutting, it's how do I enable people to do more and to do different things. And that's what he's always challenging me for. He will say, and I've been in those meetings with him and the CFO, and he's like, there's probably $50 million here. And you can see the CFO just start to water. His mouth starts to water like, ooh, I get $50 million. And the CEO will turn, Arvind will say, I don't want the money back. What I want you to do is come back to me in a week or 2 weeks or tomorrow and tell me how we're optimizing the spend there to make sure we're getting the most out of it, and let's look at the data.
In our survey, we've identified some unique areas of risk, thinking about IP, data protection, copyright, diversity, inclusion, a number of issues that have been hot button issues for the industry for quite some time, whereas suddenly brand owners get this impression that they are sort of exposing themselves to things they don't fully understand and aren't fully in control of. Is there any advice you could give to brand owners?
Yeah, I think the data protection is crucial, and people have to be very careful with the data. The way we look at it is very simple. You cannot have AI without IA. Without the right information architecture, which is all about your data, you cannot have AI. So having a ton of data that's scattered about does nothing for you. You've got to get it properly structured. You've got to take the time to get it structured at the beginning, and you've got to protect it. And part of the reason, while we're driving open source innovation and really using open source models, but part of the reason that we're driving along with that, using your own data, is because somebody could easily take 150 lines of code out of a company and put it into a public engine. And the IP of that company could very quickly disappear. And somebody else is duplicating what's going on, and that company's questioning whether or not they can stay in business. So you've got to put some very specific guidelines of what you can, the tools you can and cannot use. We've got them inside of our company.
We've got a question here that relates to the initial question I was asking you in terms of politics. With your experience in politics, what is your view on advertising supporting AI-generated disinformation during this election season?
Well, that's a nice, easy, that's an easy one.
That wasn't planned.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really big challenge. Misinformation, disinformation. I don't know what the exact answer on this is, but I think that fundamentally companies need to stay true to their principles about where they put money and where their content shows up. And we've all seen it. There have been companies who have had issues with where their data, where their ads have shown up next to what could be misinformation, disinformation, controversial content. And I think companies have to take a stand, and if it doesn't align with their business, and if it's against their morals and their principles, you've got to pull it down. You've got to take it out, and then it's incumbent on us as marketers to say, okay, this is coming out, how are we going to fill that hole? And it can be done. There are other channels out there. The same way that none of us are irreplaceable, no media channel is irreplaceable. And I think speaking with our dollars is really going to help drive it.
Question around the upskilling of marketing teams. How are you looking at upskilling the marketing organization for responsible and effective use of generative AI?
You know, a lot of it is just getting people hands-on. And we're spending a lot of time focusing on how do people get experience with the tools. So the video that you just saw, that's deploying across in our organization. We've got, I think, 6 of them launched today of those assistants. We'll have 48 of those before the year is through. And it's enabling people to test them and really explore them. One of the other things we did as a company is we had the Watson X Challenge, and we'll have another one, and we're doing them with partners. We've got almost 300,000 people that work at IBM today, and we said for 1 week there's going to be a hackathon. And that hackathon, everybody learned from the ELT. We all sat there and we played around with stuff together, to people, you know, any level in the company. And we took the best solutions, and they were judged by their peers. And we then we took those solutions to market, so people could say, "Oh, I'm learning how to do this." And the other thing that it did for us when we did something like that was it identified thousands of issues that we had with the tool, with Watson X, before it went public. So it's a mixture of putting people's hands on, learning from what they're doing, celebrating the great things that they do, and really trying to make sure everybody stays current.
We're picking up that now quite a few people in marketing are concerned about their jobs. Is that something you're picking up in your marketing teams? And if yes, how are you responding to that?
No, I'm not. And I think maybe we're different because we are a technology company and everybody sees it. But I don't think that AI is going to replace people's roles. I think it's going to augment roles. I think it's going to change the focus of where people are spending their time, and what you might be asked to do today versus what you might be asked to do in a year from now or 6 months from now. You might be asked to do something totally new, but that doesn't mean your job at said company is going to go away. I think it becomes about the flexibility of people and their willingness to learn. We did this, we did it with a service center inside of our company. 800 person service center servicing their 300,000 employees for HR. It's down to 60 people today because we were able to automate a lot of the simple tasks. People get hired faster, they get promoted faster, they get separated faster when they leave the company, all those sorts of things. But those 740 people, they're now in other value-creating opportunities for the company.
Question around disclosure. Should employees always disclose to clients and colleagues when AI has been used for an email or for a piece of research?
I think so. I think it's about that transparency, and you can lay it out there. Because we all have to understand that people are going to be able to figure it out eventually. I had a client who used to, back in the day when she'd get a proposal with Word, right? She would open up the document, and then she'd go into the properties of the document and see who created it and when it was first created. And if she found somebody did something that was like starting from a template from a year before, she'd kick the company out of the process. It eventually got found out, and I think that same thing happens here.
And one last question, final question that we're asking to all the speakers today. Your one piece of advice to a marketer here in the audience that seeks to build better brands, leveraging innovation and creativity. One piece of advice.
I think we all need to be incredibly proactive in how we experiment. And that means taking some risks. And that means trying new things. And that means getting out of the comfort zone. There can always be that 10% of comfort, but how do you move into that 90% of uncomfortable and try new things and recognize that it's not going to be perfect? And if it's not, that's okay. Manage expectations going into it and be transparent about the results. And if you have people you work for who can't understand that it didn't work the way exactly that we wanted it, and they lose their cool or, excuse my language, lose their shit over it, then maybe it's time to think about where you're working and are those the kind of people you want to work with.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Adashek. Well done, Jonathan. That was really good. Thank you. Thank you so much.